what does kind of AI strategy mean to you in a kind of like a business context?
It's really to identify what is the reason what you're trying to do. So why are you doing AI? The actual implementation and the actual tools that you can select, you can do that much later. But really start to focus on the why you want to do this and to understand how this fits.
So why do you think companies do kind of rush into AI adoption rather than kind of considering this kind of value and strategic fit?
It's a new technology, so therefore a lot of this is driven by technology people to say, okay, I want to try this, I want to do a proof of concept. I think everybody agrees that agentic AI and AI in general is going to be a game changer. And all companies, all CEOs and CIOs all think, yeah, it's absolutely the way forward. We need to do this. We need to transform this as an organization.
How AI is kind of, well, not disrupt, but kind of the legal frameworks that we currently have. And like one of the kind of scenarios we kind of spitballed was around the finance industry.
And we didn't talk about that yet. GDPR, so the protection of you as an individual still applies in AI as well. So how much we actually allow to. The prediction is that in 2 years' time, maybe 3 years' time, when you and I go to see a specialist, we insist that there will be an AI next to the actual doctor or specialist to help with the actual diagnosis, because that's how far I think we've come.
What does it really mean to have an AI strategy? Not just a list of tools or another agent pilot, but something deeper. A plan that reshapes your organization from the inside out. Today's guest knows all about that. He spent a career architecting transformation, not just systems, but entire industries. From the backbone of British Gas, Centrica, to his current role guiding energy and utility companies at Salesforce. This is Ronald Starreveld, a distinguished enterprise architect who doesn't just talk about the future, he builds blueprints to reach it. And in this conversation, we go deep into why most AI projects fail before they start, how to create a strategy that outlasts the next LLM release, and how AI could make or break the future of the energy grid. If you're a CIO, CTO, or just somebody trying to make a sense of the AI noise, then this episode will challenge how you think about value, governance, and risk. Because as Ronald says, you don't just start with the how, you start with the why. Now, this is the Salesforce Posse podcast. So let's go. Welcome, Ronald Starreveld, to the podcast. Thanks for being here. We're going to be talking about like AI strategy and things like that on this podcast, because I think it's super important when we talk about Agentforce and that kind of world. But before we start, I'd love to know how you got into Salesforce and AI.
Well, thank you for having me in the first place. So yes, Salesforce, what do we do and how do I get in here? I've been working in IT for a long time. I did computer science back in the 1980s, starting off with an IBM compatible PC using DBase, and you're probably way before your time. That's how I started.
I don't know, you'll be surprised.
But always worked in IT, worked in various sectors, and eventually ended up working for a company called Centrica. And Centrica is a holding company of what include British Gas, amongst others. And we were a Salesforce customers for many, many years, but we actually didn't know what to do with this. And eventually ended up with trying to find something else for me to do as a job. And I thought, I know Salesforce, I've worked with them for the last 5 years or so, I know a bit of the inside of the company. Why don't I join them? Which is back in 2021 now. So it's just over 4 years working with Salesforce. First of all, as a customer, but now as part of the actual sales organization.
Cool. So just to kind of get an idea, I think there's a lot of talk around strategy and things like that, but what does kind of AI strategy mean to you in a kind of like a business context? Could you explain and define really what it means?
Yeah, and that's a good question, because most people jump straight into, this is how we use LLMs and how we use ChatGPT and all the other stuff. But actually, what I think is important for most organizations, rather than jumping straight into understanding exactly what use cases could be solved by LLM, is really to identify what is the reason what you're trying to do. So why are you doing AI? other ways how to implement some use cases. And by asking the question why, it's also understanding what is it what you're trying to do from an overall business perspective and where AI fits in. So what that means, what it means is about understanding as you work for an organization, what is the business objectives? What are you trying to achieve? And with that, answering that question, you can then start to formulate what is your vision? What is your overall vision for AI within your organization? And you can do this by bringing the right people together within the organization, understanding from a governance perspective where that fits in, understanding what the regulatory frameworks say. In the UK, we're lucky enough that it's quite open. It's all based on some principles rather than being very strict like it is in the EU, for instance, as an example. So therefore, really defining the why you're doing this before you start answering the what and the how you can do this. The actual implementation and the actual tools that you can select, you can do that much later, but really start to focus on the why you want to do this and to understand how this fits. Understand how this fits what the rest of the organization is thinking. What are we doing across the organization from an AI perspective? This goes beyond Agentforce that we want to focus on today, but this goes beyond as a much wider topic. How does it fit and where does it do?
Thanks for watching the podcast so far. Now, I would like if you could just do me a little favour. Now, over 95% of you don't subscribe or follow this Salesforce Posse podcast, and it'd be great if you could just click the button so more people can find out about the podcast. And also that this podcast is sponsored by the amazing Nintex Salesforce document generation and process automation company. Now, I've used their DocGen tool and recommended it to many companies over the years, and it allows me to create documents with ease, all without a single line of code, so that organizations can focus on what really matters. But with all that said, let's carry on with the podcast. So why do you think companies do kind of rush into AI adoption rather than kind of considering this kind of value and strategic fit?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where it's a new technology. So therefore, a lot of this is driven by technology people to say, okay, I want to try this. I want to do a proof of concept without really bringing the business on their journey with them and really understanding what the implications are from a business perspective. So therefore, it becomes a pet project, it becomes a proof of concept. We're trying to do something, trying to prove different technologies. Well, I think it is important to really step back. Now, we have to do this. We have to some extent, do that. But then once you've maybe done that initial assessment, you need to go straight into taking the business with you on a journey and taking it away from just a technology idea and a technology solution to actually how it can actually benefit the business. Because I think everybody agrees that agentic AI and AI in general is going to be a game changer. And all companies, all CEOs and CIOs all think, yep, it's absolutely the way forward. We need to do this. We need to transform this as an organization. And it's really to help organization effectively become a digital company in other ways. So therefore, I think from a CEO perspective, from a CXO perspective, we will have support, but we need to take them on a journey. Don't do this in isolation. And that's why I think a lot of the time this happens as a proof of concept and that stalls, because then eventually when there's either proven that it works or it doesn't work, then they ask the question, oh, how are we going to do this? What is the business case behind it? And I think what I want to advocate is really to focus on that AI strategy, to take that into consideration before you start using the actual use case themselves and do some of the proof of concepts.
So how do you kind of see it fitting into kind of industries like energy and utilities? So the unique challenges that they have, where do you see the kind of AI strategy kind of fitting with the challenges that they have?
Yeah, that's a good question. With regards to, it depends on the industry that you're working on, but the overall, the UK government has issued a white paper around what we're going to base upon on principles about fairness, principles about being accountable for your AI, rather than being very strict. And each regulatory framework and each regulator within the UK will come up over the next number of years about what's specific for their particular one, if that's finance or energy or whatever, will come up with its own framework of how we need to do this. So we need to keep an eye on this. It's something that you don't do once and then that's it. We probably have to do this every year or every 6 months we need to review this because things are moving so
Yeah.
quickly.
Exactly. Yeah.
You need to be aware of what's going on in the rest of the world from a law perspective, from a regulator perspective. What are the implications for that? But overall, from an overall perspective of risk and risk management, each organization will deal with risks in a different way. If you work for a very risk-averse or risk-averse organization, you probably need to be looking at and taking this through and understand what does that mean for my organization. Well, for some organizations, innovation and driving forward with new technology is something that's in their blood, that's part of something that they do all the time. And therefore, they're much more willing to take the risk because,
Yeah.
as we all know, AI is a new technology. As we know, AI doesn't always confirm as in a fixed response. It's not always to say that if you put this request in today and you put the same request in tomorrow, you will get a different answer because AI generated at that time. And having the ability to accept that as a risk and everybody being aware of that, I think is part of that AI strategy of understanding and communicating this and the acceptance by the rest of the organization be able to do this. And it depends on where you are in an organization, which sector you work in, and how willing they're willing to take that risk.
Yeah. And I think one of the reasons I wanted to come on the podcast, I did an amazing workshop with you at the Salesforce Tower, how AI is kind of, well, not disrupt, but kind of the legal frameworks that we currently have. And like one of the kind of scenarios we kind of spitballed was around the finance industry.
Yes.
And they in the UK have got a legal duty of care to for all their customers, right? So if AI can determine that this person, based on all the way their habits of their transactions they're having, is actually got a gambling problem, actually, is there a legal requirement then under the duty of care for that bank to inform that person or some other organization? Which I found was like, wow, this is gonna be interesting, right?
Yeah, definitely. And this is also things like, and we didn't talk about that yet, GDPR. So the protection of your as an individual still applies in AI as well. So how much we actually are allowed to, from a GDPR perspective, to provide your information about your habits, to send this off to another organization is something that I don't know, and I'm not sure if that's been explored from a legal perspective. But I think we will come across these things. And I'll give you another example in a different, also very regulated space. I was listening to Radio 4 the other day, and they were talking about going to see a doctor or a specialist. And now we would not think about using AI as the only option. But the prediction is that in 2 years' time, maybe 3 years' time, when you and I go to see a specialist, we insist that there will be an AI next to the actual doctor or specialist to help with the actual diagnosis, because that's how far I think we come. And the ability to see things and to recognize things will be much more advanced, but actually will be much more advanced than what we can do as humans. So things like what you said about in the finance industry, when we identify in the finance industry that a particular individual has some sort of habits, whatever that might be, I think we need to think about how we can actually convey that. But again, there is a data protection that it still applies to this as well. It's not any different from any other system that we have. We cannot just take that data and use it somewhere else or sell it somewhere else. So that still applies.
Yeah, and I think like actually even my dentist now, when they take a X-ray of my teeth, the AI is coming up with prompts and things it's found. And I'm like, wow, it's already there, right? And it's in the wild.
Exactly. So it's only a matter of time before we do this and before we're able to do this. And they see different things as well. There was an article about, I think it was to do with bowel cancer, and someone who had an MRI scan, and the specialist had a look at it and came up with a diagnosis. And then the AI was looking at the thousands and thousands and thousands of MRIs of all the bowel scan. And they came up with something that the doctor had not seen at all, which was actually a minor thing. And actually the implication of that was that the actual patient didn't have to go to this very strict treatment that the doctor had prescribed at all, because it was just a small thing that they needed to do because the doctor didn't see it. And I think that's what the beauty is of AI.
Even like the recent research, I think the university has found out that actually it was always the impression that AI would help the people that weren't knowledgeable in a particular area. But actually, where it's really maximizing its value is where it's supporting somebody who's already an expert or good,
Yes.
guru or whatever you want to call them in the field, and it's allowing them to really open up their mind of other things or things they might have mistaken or not spotted or latest information or latest thinking, and then they can interpret that the way they see fit, right?
Absolutely.
Putting that human
Yes.
element.
Yeah, it's augmenting. It's working together
Mm.
with the human. I think what's the strength of it is there is effectively a part that actually say you can have autonomous AI and you
Mm.
have augmented. But I think you're right. I think the augmented is probably more powerful, as in
Yeah.
helping still there, doing the mundane task, yes, but also about doing the in-depth and really the knowledge that it has gathered over the years of seeing the many thousands and thousands of use cases that they have seen the data from to be able to come up with a
Yeah.
slightly different diagnosis. So I think you're absolutely right from that perspective. I think that's what the value is.
Going back a bit to, not agent force, but the kind of the tactical use of AI versus the strategic AI thinking. I found, or even with people I've worked with, where they're still kind of stuck in that tactical AI world of just getting technically implemented, and they
Yes.
know that actually, yes, strategy, having a more strategic thinking about it is good. They just don't know how to transition from that and what argument they can give or things they can say to their manager, say, hey, look, we need to be thinking a more high level. So
Yes.
what advice would you give to those, those people to help them kind of thinking, I think you said, getting out of the weeds,
Yes.
when we
Very
chatted, but,
much. Very
is
much
that,
so.
yeah.
Yeah.
How, what advice would you give on that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. If you ask a CIO or any transformation or a business IT people, they all say the same. We're busy. We're way too busy for these things. We
Yeah.
cannot step away. A week is already full. I don't have time
Yeah.
for this. That's what
It's
that's
in
what
the
it comes
sprint. We've
down
got to
to.
finish it.
Exactly. But I think it is important to understand much more for actually understanding, bringing your organization with you on a journey and actually using AI in the right way. Now, there is and the reason why I presented this at the Architecture Forum at Salesforce Tower was around that Salesforce is offering for some of our customers a workshop, a 3-day workshop. Could be strong down to one way if that's something that is something that the customer wants, but really about going through those steps and using a framework, an enterprise architecture framework to say, look, we need to answer all these questions. And we can do this in a 1-day or a 3-day workshop with you to help you to define what that AI strategy is. So it's not asking for something like a 6-week study or something else. Now we can do this actually quite quickly in order to be able to do that without a massive overhead to really help you define what that is and what the AI strategy is. And I think that will be greatly beneficial for organization. And whether or not, which technology, we're not talking about technology here per se, we're just
Mm.
talking about how to use AI moving forward and how it fits within the overall framework. And I think you need to take the organization on a journey because, as we already said,
Mm.
it's probably going to be augmented together with the human. So therefore, how are you going to transform this? How are you going to educate those people? How are you going to help those people using the technology moving forward? And where are the best use cases? Because us as technologists come up with some ideas about where we can use AI, but actually the business might actually have much better ideas of where they can use AI. So
Yeah.
therefore, bringing them in actually will help during this ideation phase of coming up with the various use cases where they say, okay, this might be very beneficial because it relates back to this particular objective from a business perspective. And therefore
Mm.
identifying not just the ones that are simple to do understandably that actually can implement quite quickly, but actually what gives the biggest benefit and highlighting and
Yeah.
prioritizing those business benefits and identifying them not only upfront, but also define what they look like. Where's the data coming from? What are the guardrails around this? How do we make sure that it actually stays within a regulatory framework? All these things that you need to answer, and that makes the actual implementation so much smoother.
Yeah.
And therefore, you have a business case, you understand why, you have your business with you. So the implementation will be much quicker from that perspective.
Mm. I think it's a kind of a little bit of a mindset shift as well of actually what is AI almost, right?
Yeah.
Because I mentioned this before with you, but there was a client that we were working with and they thought, oh, can't figure, this AI, this agent force just doesn't work, right? It's just can't see the value. And they literally built a chatbot
Yes.
out of agent force because they were so used to thinking in that way, right? A prescriber asks this question, then this one, blah, 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 blah. And they completely lost the value of what AI was for, right? It's also that, taking, as you said, like taking them on that journey of understanding as well of where the value comes from it and how it could be used so that they can then see, yeah, we could use it here, here, here. Oh, this we could find the value like here would be amazing, right? If we could do this. And then, do that experimentation, that test.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if you have a hammer and a nail, guess what you're going to use? You're going to use the hammer and nail. And that's what agent force as well. People see agent force, we have agent, therefore we need to do this. And there's definitely an element of what people need to think about. Oh, is this better suited for chatbot? Is this better suited for implementation or automation using Flow? Is it better suited for something else as a technology that is out there? But I think I'm particularly keen on, and I'm aware of this, that from someone who works in the energy space, AI generates and requires a lot of energy. So the difference between asking Google something for a normal query or asking Gemini same query through AI is about 10x the amount of energy that it requires, not 10%, 10x. So I think from an environment perspective and a wasteful perspective, we need to think about when are we going to use the tools and how are we going to use the tools, and actually is another better way how to implement some of the things.
This actually follows quite nicely on to how do you actually kind of measure that ROI of AI initiatives, especially when they're, cost concerns. And I think, especially, when we're shifting to this consumption-based model of kind of costing, how do we do that? Right? What's that structure of how that will look like?
And I think that's a good point to raise. And I think by doing the AI strategy, you start to define upfront what your actually KPIs are. How are you going to measure your improvement? And by doing that upfront, you can also then start to identify these use cases that we have identified actually don't make sense from a business perspective. They don't stack up. So let's not go ahead and implement them. But actually, the other ones that you actually haven't thought about or maybe you haven't considered is something that has a great business benefit that might have a big impact on, I don't know, you might have an outsource agreement or BPO agreement where you outsource part of your call center, your sales service, whatever that might be. And actually, by implementing Agentforce as a replacement potentially for some of the agents that you're using, or to make much more efficient use of your resource, of your existing resources, that is something that to be said. I mean, there's going to be a big resource shortage, I think, in the short term, specifically in some sectors, and some sectors it will be very different. But if you look at, for instance, again, coming back to my lovable energy industry, that there is going to be a lot more demand coming through for engineers to go out there to do installations of solar panels and wind turbines and batteries and all that sort of stuff. There's an estimate there's about 500,000 people in the UK that they need in order to be able to do this, and that there's all kinds of back office jobs and everything else that is required, because it's very hard to find 500,000 within a number of years that we need this. So therefore, if you make the existing people, the resource, the employees that you have, make it more efficient by using Agentforce, by having this augmented and working together with a human, I think that works really, really good. And I think what people always think about, and this is another reason why I think the AI strategy is so important, because most people think about AI, they think about an LLM, a large language model, and how you can create. But the efficiency that you create by building something in the flow of work. So while you're doing this, while you have the data there, you know exactly what it is about, and you actually make this whole process so much more efficient, rather than doing this manually through an LLM, creating some sort of prompt, and makes it very inefficient. And therefore, I think that's an element that you would miss if you're not following the AI strategy, and therefore missing it out as part of your overall business case and measuring how your performance and how your company is actually improving as an overall, to actually say, okay, yes, now it works. Now we can see it work. Because I think it is critical for people to understand that it is part of the actual working that we're doing with with the businesses that we have, the organization, the people that we work, whether or not that's being customers, whether or not that's partners, whether or not that's being employees, internal processes. These are all elements of use cases that we can look into when we start thinking about AI and where we can make the efficiencies in order to make the cost reductions.
So we've kind of got our strategy, but AI is like constantly changing. It seems like every week there's something new, right? So how can organizations ensure that, this AI strategy remains adaptable without kind of falling into the kind of shiny object syndrome? How do we kind of make that kind of a sustainable AI strategy that can move with the times, I suppose?
Yeah, that's tough. It is tough. I mean, as I said earlier, I've been working in IT and technology for the last 30 or so years. This is by far the part of the business and that it moves so quickly. I constantly have to educate myself by listening to podcasts, reading books, understanding new technology, but also identifying what actually is important to me and what is not important to me. So for instance, how the way Agentforce works, I think helps in that respect, because it is not dependent on one single LLM. We will know that there's going to be new LLMs coming every other week. There's a new one coming along. And I think key for you to really focus on as your listeners is around what does it improve on my business side, and how do I make sure that I have the right data to answer the question? Because for me, as part of the AI strategy, is the data is something that you need to start with. You need to understand, and you need to have some sort of data strategy before you can go into AI and answer the question. Now, there might be some things, as I mentioned, that will change and that will constantly change, but it's key to understand what the actual business cases are and the data that is actually associated with them. But you're right, there's no denying AI and the new technologies is something that is constantly evolving and constantly changing, and therefore you need to be somehow keep abreast, but also identifying which are the ones that actually are important and which are actually you can actually change. You need to have some sort of flexibility around this.
I think that's kind of like, I think this is, again, is a bit of that secret sauce in Salesforce that nobody kind of knows. And I think is going to be super important for the future. Is like you touched on it briefly, was that, you could be any LLM, right? And I think you were going to see this emergence of industry specific LLMs, small LLMs that are targeted in different industries. And so you're going to need that, which I think, Salesforce is right there, well placed to, for that multi LLM connection to allow me to, use a generic model, but also that industry specific model to get whatever I need out of it.
And measure the performance.
Yeah,
and actually understand that for this specific question or for this specific use case, I'm better off using this LLM. But actually, the data strikes me if I go for this in another area for use case, actually might better use this LLM. So having that flexibility is something that I think is absolutely important. And I think Salesforce absolutely got that right.
Yeah, completely, 100%. Yeah. So we kind of touched on the idea of multi-agent environments. Do you think businesses should be considering now to prepare for that as a future?
I think it's going to be a little while. When I say little while, that might be 6 months in this AI world. That's a long-term planning. It's 6 months now. But
for those who don't know, could you just explain what a multi-AI agent world looks like? Yeah.
Yes, so there is and there will be a world like that where we have multiple agents. Some might be within your organization boundary, and having a specialism, and being able to communicate autonomously between two digital AI components. And you might have one that is a sales one, might have a service one, or might something else, and being able to communicate that. Now, if you think about that scenario and then extend it to actually having an ability to have agent-to-agent communication through company boundaries, where you might have another company outside or partner or someone else that have an agent, and you've been able to communicate that through autonomously between the various agents to come up with the actual end answer, is something that is actually will come. And based on APIs that will be out there to actually make that communication happen. So therefore, it is also important when you think about implementing AI use cases, is about who is going to use this. Is it going to be another agent potentially that can use that particular, and therefore you need to have some sort of API capability on the back of it as well. But it will be coming. There's going to be a very if you read the internet, there's all kinds of complexity around this and all kinds of options around this, whether that's serial, hierarchy, expansion, all kinds of different models around having this agent-to-agent communication. But it will come for sure. But I think we need to prove first that it actually works in a single instance before we start thinking about this. And I think, like with most of these things, is around if you think about something else, API's ability to communicate between various companies. There's an element of trust. There's an element that needs to be there. You need to be able to trust the other company with their agent and the data, making sure that the data that they have, or maybe the data that you provide, is safeguarded and has some protection against them. So there's definitely that in place, and there needs to be so much more of a commoditized side of things. I can see a world and that might not be too far, maybe 2 years or 3 years away, where we actually have the ability to commoditize some of the APIs and publish those APIs interfaces like we do with OpenAPI today, of how to interface between various organizations, and maybe use that as a mechanism moving forward.
And I love my own personal agent that I'm going to say, go get me some insurance, find the cheapest, off you go. Just going to talk to all the agents and get my insurance quote.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. What they were talking about, some use case for travel agents and not having to have all the details of where you need to go and plan everything, which is something maybe sad, but that's what we're heading towards. It's about not having to worry about some of the details, because they will provide it to you on a whenever it's something that is required. Or not.
But also, my personal agent knows what I like and dislike, and therefore could talk to that agent to discuss how we plan that, that trip or that holiday, right? Yeah.
Personalization is key, and I think that's what agents allow us to do, is to be personalized. But in order to be able to do that, you need to have the data about you as an individual, you as an organization, what your likes and dislikes are.
Cool. Okay, so for companies kind of starting to formalize their AI strategy, what would you say would the non-negotiables that you need to get right from the start?
I think from any organization, you need to probably have 3 things. Start with 3 things. It's always good. 3 is a good number.
Yeah, always.
Start with the vision. What is it that you're trying to do? What is it that you want to do? Who is going to help you formulate that vision within your organization? And who are the key stakeholders? Identifying key stakeholders within the organization. And we all know maybe some people within the organization that might be up for this, because you need to be up for this in order to be able to have this, because you need to be looking for people that are willing to take that risk. Then the second step, if you've done your vision and you have your team within your organization and define what it looks like, the second thing is about governance. Where does it fit within the governance framework? What is the risk model? What are you prepared to take as a risk? How does it feed into the overall governance or risk management that might already exist within your organization? So make sure you plug it in. Make sure you plug in things like funding and how you're going to pay for these things, how you're going to measure this. So this is vision. And then we've got governance. And then the last thing is about execution, is about trying to identify those use cases that actually would work within your organization. So identifying them, do the implementation. Before you start to implement, you need to understand, like I mentioned before, about what are the most valuable use cases that exist for your organization, and identify maybe the ones that actually require not as much effort to start learning, and maybe start the harder ones a bit later. But yeah, in that order: vision, governance, and execution of the use cases.
Yeah, cool. And so how also do you see education being, because I don't think we touched on the mindset. But when starting that strategy, you might have people that kind of get AI, but people that you want to bring on that journey that may not have that experience.
Yes.
Where does education kind of fit into that?
Yeah, that's part of the architecture framework as well. There's an element of taking everybody on a journey and making sure that the transformation that still needs to happen and education of people. But I think there's no denying in my head, there need to be some sort of rethinking about our talent pool, about people that know how to write prompts, people how to use AI moving forward. There will be certain skills that we will need from people moving in the future to be able to use that technology, because it's one thing to develop it, but it's using it is another thing. And I see this all the time because working for Salesforce, we have AI in a lot of different places, and places where the salespeople are using it for all kinds of things with regard to communication with their customer, for preparation for their customer meetings, for coming up with ideas of how the customer could benefit. So, but there's an element of you need to educate. So that's what's happening constantly, and then and we use Show agents and trailblazers as a main mechanism to use that not only to educate people on the hard technology skills, but also about how to use AI is an absolutely fundamental part in order to be successful. Because without those people, I think we're going to miss out. We definitely have to miss out in that perspective, that you need to take those people on a journey and need to educate them.
Cool. So if you could give one piece of advice to a C-level, CIO, CTO today about AI strategy, what would it be?
That's a very good question. I think I don't have to convince them that AI is will be positive. I think everybody sort of is about, statistically is about 60-70%, even maybe sometimes higher, that people say, yeah, we need it. But I think they all say, well, we're so busy with all kinds of existing project transformations, whatever that might be, we don't have time. And I said, you have to make time. This is going to happen. People will use, and they already are using AI within your organization. Whether or not you think they don't,
they do or don't. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Now, in order to help you with the risk side of things and the governance side of things, you need to work on an AI strategy in order to at least bring those people in and understand what the actual needs are of moving and have some controls around it. Because if you don't, the risk of actually doing nothing and actually allowing these people to continue is your risk of your data being exposed somewhere to outside. You're probably using your data to educate the LLMs already, and there's no limiting about this. People don't think about this. They might be in breach of some regulatory requirements, so there could be fines for your organization moving forward. So there's plenty of reasons why you need to do this and why you need to do this as soon as you can.
Yeah.
And we can help you.
Yeah. And so actually we talked about, you just mentioned a little about the training the LLMs with your private IP. And how do you envisage these kind of the AI guardrails evolving over the next few years to kind of protect that?
Yeah, we need to see how that evolves. But I think, as I mentioned before, things like GDPR still exist.
Yeah.
What I think Agentforce has done tremendously well, apart from the actual flexibility around the LLM, is to build all kinds of other capabilities in as part of it that people most of the time they don't see. But things like hiding personal identifiable information, PII data, so it doesn't actually being exposed to and being used. The ability to actually have agreements with those LLM providers that they cannot have zero data retention. So the ability to actually not retain any of your organization's data is something that is fundamental and baked into the Agentforce capability. Things like bias and toxicity is something that, again, that a lot of people don't see, because when they think about AI and they go to LLM, go to ChatGPT, they don't have. But if you're talking about an organization, you need to protect your data. You need to protect the IP that you might have within your organization that you're not buying. And then there's a good example of AI and how it can be used or how it cannot can be used. I can remember that Mark Benioff was developing. This is about 6 months ago, maybe slightly longer, about how to develop the AI strategy for Salesforce himself and where to use it. And in order to be able to understand what Microsoft was doing, I asked ChatGPT, and ChatGPT came back with all the information about. And you would be surprised how much actual corporate data you'll find using AI, using these open AI capabilities. And it's like, okay, maybe we need to be very, very careful. And I think people have to realize that now.
And I think, and also it's you're going to get a few more cases cropping up on the news to make it even more aware of what's going on, right?
Yes. And also, there's other thing that we keep on hearing about is about IP, so intellectual property. So if the LLM or any of AI capabilities are using data that is available that actually is protected by AI, how do you make sure that your AI component actually doesn't use that? Because you could see a scenario where a company, a large organization, is using AI, using an LLM, and it's using somehow IP protected data, and you could see all kinds of legal cases coming your way about no, I'll do this. And it's always going to be the big organization who are going to be most vulnerable from that perspective.
Yeah. So I think probably nearly my final question is, where do you personally see the most exciting opportunities for AI in the next 5 years?
I'm going to stick with something that is close to my heart, which is to do with the energy transition. And the energy transition and the climate change that is happening is about electrification. It's electrification of our heating, of our homes and our offices, electrification of transport, how we're going to go about doing this. So we're going to be much more pushing for electricity, green electricity. And the challenge of that is that we can generate enough electricity when it's windy and it's sunny. But also, what are we going to do during the night? What are we going to do when the wind is not blowing? Yeah, it's about this is what we call within the energy space about flexibility, and how do we go about when to store energy, electricity in the battery, when to use it, etc., etc. An electric vehicle, which is nothing else but a battery on wheels, is another good example where we can actually integrate those into the grid in order to be able to manage and level our electricity demand. So when you put on your lights, the actual lights come on in your home, and you never have to worry about it. Now, that is not possible without AI. AI is absolutely fundamental because it requires a constant monitoring of where we are at any given time and any geolocation that we have in the UK or anywhere else in the world for that matter, about what the actual electricity demand will be. So it actually, when you switch on the light will come on and you don't have to worry about it. Now, that can only be done, as I mentioned, by having AI to AI conversations and without any human intervention, because a human is too slow from that perspective in order to be able to do this. And making those predictions using weather, television schedules, looking at all kinds of other information out there to predict what the actual electricity demand is within your own area, or your street, or your suburb, or your village, or your town, or your city, is something that is absolutely AI is critical in order to be able to address that moving forward. So we continue to have the lights on, and we don't have this blackouts that we don't sometimes see in some countries.
Yeah, and actually having to oversupply because as humans we don't know, whereas the AI can reduce that, oversupply down because it knows better what's going on in the street at the different levels. Yeah, so it makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Cool. So
that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it's good. Yeah, cool. So do you have anything else, before I ask my final question, do you have anything else to say around AI in the future?
No, I don't think so. I think it's an exciting time and an exciting time to be around, to work in this industry, to see what's going on. I'm very, very keen to see what the actual implications are from implementing agent and agent force. And you can see some good examples of where, like in specific industries. So one of the existing industries that we're working with, and that we're working with very, very goodly and deeply with them for the last number of months, is organizations have very much cyclical type of demand for their product. So, for instance, there was a company in the US that provides and supplies books and all kinds of other equipment to students. And that typically is this massive big peak during the start of the school year, and then the rest of it goes down. So you can imagine with this digital workforce, because effectively that's what agents will become as a digital workforce, the ability to flex up and down is something that we don't know, we haven't experienced before. And that's something that is absolutely fundamental moving forward, of actually having the ability to do this and actually opening the eyes of the CIOs and the CEOs to say, look, you've got an unlimited capacity of digital labor. What are you going to do with it? What does it mean for your organization? So that's something that I think that we need to get our head around and need to understand and need to get that message across. But that's also part of the excitement of using AI.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Okay. So my final question that I ask most people on the podcast when I remember is, if you could wind the clock back to a certain time in your past and could give yourself some advice, what point of time would it be and what advice would that be?
It was when I was 18 or 19 years old, and I had didn't know what I was going to do with my life, and I didn't know what I was going to finish up school. I had to do. I grew up in the Netherlands, so I had to do my national service. So that gave me 18 months to think about what I want to do moving forward. Because initially I was thinking I want to become a physiotherapist, because I like that physical biology and all that sort of stuff. But I found maths and science also very good. I thought, what am I going to do with my life? And I'm so glad I picked computer science, because that was the alternative. Eventually ended up in a good career that took me for many years across all kinds of opportunities across different continents that I worked in. To provide me with that opportunity is something that absolutely always loved that I made that decision. The other one that I would go back to is probably about when I was in my 30s or 40s. And I was working for about 10 years in finance, banking, and then I had an opportunity to go into telecommunications. And I worked for that for about 10 years. And now for the last 10 years or so, I worked in the utility space, in the energy space. What I would like to advise me is try different sectors, try different, because you can learn so much more from actually working in multiple sectors if you have the opportunity to do so. So I think that's something that I definitely would recommend moving forward, and grabbing the opportunity if you have that when you're younger. Absolutely. Don't be afraid.
No, exactly. And I think, I can definitely echo that, because I've worked in, many different industries. It's quite interesting how you get similar things happening. They just call it different things, right? But then you can cherry pick bits and go, oh, that's a really great idea that could be transferred over here, right?
Exactly.
And I worked in film post-production, which I know, crazy. But they basically had, Agile Scrum. They used Agile Scrum in film post-production. They just didn't call it that, right? It was their film pipeline, visual effects pipeline. They'd look at a wall, see all the shots laid out, do the review at the end of the shot each day or each week of everything they've completed. And it was just exactly the same, but a lot more visual. But it was quite fascinating. But brilliant. So I hope you enjoyed the Salesforce Posse podcast. It's been great having you on. Learned a lot about AI strategy.
Excellent. Well, it was my pleasure, and thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, no worry, and hope to see you soon.
All right.
See ya.
Take care. Bye-bye.